not the third, today's our fourth. So we talked in the first week, we talked about how as an individual you can turn things into a different situation for your relationship to be thriving. Then the second day we talked about how you can make your relationship into a different scenario once you've done the individual things. And then on the third day, which was last week, we discussed what it would look like if you can change your communication. Today, we're going to talk about intimacy and how to build that, because that becomes the next layer after we are done talking about the other pieces. So let me get you guys some slides so that we can have a discussion about it. What's interesting is you really can't skip a day. So I feel like, it'll be useful for you to have this information and you'll pick up what it is that I'm putting down. But if you try to skip a day, then you're going to have a hard time, because if you're not being who you need to be, it's going to be really hard for you to have the things that you want to have. And the only way for us to be who we need to be is to know how to do it. Like start really being able to work on it. So here we are, thriving couples intimacy. Let's talk about it. Let's get into what it looks like. The first thing I want you to think about is we need to have bridges, not walls, right? So how do I cultivate deep connection in my relationship? When we talk about intimacy, a lot of times the things that we want to talk about is the first thing that at least comes to my mind, maybe it's just my mind, but it's sex. Like I think that that's the first thing until I start doing more definition on it. And so here's my definition piece is intimacy. And this, so we can all get on the same page with what I'm discussing today. Intimacy is a deep and close connection with someone where you feel safe and loved, and you have the confidence to share your body, thoughts, and or feelings openly and honesty. So that kind of changes the game a little bit, because now it gives us the ability to think past, like, if, let's just say in your relationship, if you're struggling sexually, there's probably a layer of everything that we're going to talk about that's going to benefit you and then increase your ability to have sex and do more sexually together. Okay, so start here. This is the starting spot. So let's talk about the barriers and then us being able to overcome them. So the first thing that I want you to think about is that the barriers could either be internal or external. And so the internal ones we would consider, and this has been talked about throughout the day, the internal ones can be considered something like past traumas, things that you've experienced in your history, whether it's relationship history or family history or any kind of history. Those traumas might create a barrier to the intimacy and the ideas of you developing strong intimacy in your relationship. But then there's also external things like stress, right? So both are possible, both are valid, and they all deserve some kind of paying attention to if we're going to get a little bit better and get to a different place where we can have a positive interaction in our relationship. So what are some of the scenarios? So the first one is past traumas. This is something I was just mentioning right there. The past traumas idea says that there will be things that you've experienced, and sometimes they're small, right? Sometimes they're really small, to the point where it's been something all your life that you've heard and done and or been conditioned to do that wasn't really wrong until it came to your relationship. And now there's an undoing or a switch that has to flip to be different and get to a different place. And so the best thing for you to start thinking about is, how do we really communicate differently about the traumas? There's two sides to me. Is I think that not only do we need to be able to communicate the traumas, like if, let's say I'm the one experiencing the trauma, I need to be able to communicate it, but then I want my partner to be able to accept that there is a trauma, right? So it goes hand in hand. We want to really work on being able to put those things together. If it's really bad, you might have to seek your own therapy just to be able to work through and process the traumas that go on, okay? Trust issues. So sometimes there are things in your relationship that have happened, like infidelity or lying or any other kind of addiction, and those things make trust issues inside of your relationship. But let's say that you're at a point where you're like, man, I'm done with the things that I used to do and I want to get to a different place. Well, you have to understand that there's some time that it's going to take, and there's two people in the relationship, so both have to again have have the idea that says, I actually want to rebuild and do something different. Well, in order for us to do that, we have to have a lot of reps at being able to be honest with each other and be transparent with each other, and see each other as partners instead of as somebody who I need to answer to. How do I create that scenario? How do I create a scenario that says, man, my partner doesn't have to answer to me? That's on one side. And then on the other side, how do I create a scenario that says, hey, I don't need to look at my partner as a parent, right? I need to really look at my partner as somebody who's loving me and that I want to get better with together. The third thing is your communication breakdowns. And I won't spend too much time on this because we talked about communication last week, but the biggest thing that I want you to focus on is to learn and practice healthy communication strategies that we learned last week. And so if you're able to focus on doing it different instead of us just staying in the same communication patterns, you're going to get to a different spot and you can start to draw closer to each other. So here's the principles that I think, and this is really important because these principles that I'm going to list to you, you're going to, if you watched all the previous presenters, you're going to see these principles that they describe pretty much in some way or another. If you know these principles, you get to spin off of these principles. If you don't interpret it incorrectly, you get to spin off these principles and start building in your relationship. This will help you to deepen the intimacy. If I was just to give you skills, you wouldn't have it. We'll talk about that in a second. But I'm giving you the principles, the things that you actually need to have. The first one is you have to be intentional, right? So in your relationship, you have to be intentional. And what I'm saying by that, if we go back to this slide where it says trust issues, this is just a good example to help you understand what intentional means. You can't go in that scenario and kind of try to like go from day to day about how you're going to be. If you're trying to do away with or start creating a scenario where you're rebuilding trust, you need to be intentional about what it is that you're doing. You have to say, look, today I'm going to do everything that means transparent. Today I'm going to do everything that means serve my partner, right? I have to be intentional about how I'm doing that scenario. Okay. And so be deliberate and purposeful in creating intimacy. The more that you're able to be intentional, you get to a different space. Vulnerability. And all of these will be hard. So I won't even preface each one of these with that concept. But I'm telling you guys right now, just because it's a principle doesn't make it easy. These are things that you're going to have to put in your bag to practice every day. And if you want to, wake up on a daily basis and say, okay, I'm working on principle 2. I'm working on principle 3. Really work at it. Okay. So vulnerability, it takes courage to be emotionally open and honest. Vulnerability is the deepest option for intimacy in your relationship. Brene Brown talks about vulnerability, and I love the way she talks about it. It takes us being brave enough to be vulnerable and get as deep as we possibly can deep as we possibly can. It takes a lot for us to do that. And there's a couple of reasons for that. But one thing that helps us as a couple is if we're prepared to receive vulnerability, that's helpful, right? Because that helps propel that in our relationship. We want to breathe vulnerability in our relationship by being prepared to receive it, but then also being brave enough to give it. The continuously learning aspect. So don't stay in the same spot. Don't keep your relationship where it is. You can't possibly be good. You have to be willing to grow the things of your relationship. So what are the things of my relationship? Well, I need to understand my partner more. And me understanding the yesterday partner isn't good enough. I need to start understanding the today partner, right? Because that's the person that I'm with, is the today partner. Where's my partner headed? I need to understand that. But even more so, and what's useful is if we start understanding ourselves. So can you put continuous learning in your idea of principles so you can get closer in your relationship? Radical acceptance. So this is a huge deal because your partner will not be what it is that you want them to be for every single moment. So if you could learn to love and accept your partner, everything changes. And radical acceptance says, even whenever they're at their worst, can I accept them? And I always have to put this caveat on it because I think maybe I should stop putting it in because I know people are doing the best they can, but we're not talking about abusive relationships here. We're talking about thriving couples, right? So even people who are trying to thrive, a lot of times they're not at their best, right? If I'm trying to get better, I'm not going to do the best things all the time. And those mistakes that I make or that person that I'm being in the moment is not who I am. And there's two parts to that. One is I don't want you guys to let each other accept that. Like, for instance, if my partner does a violation, I don't want my partner to think like that's who they are. I want them to know that's what they did. Right. So that's one. But then even for myself, I don't want to start thinking about that's who I am. That's what I do. No, I have to start saying things and thinking things different, so that I can have a radical acceptance about who my partner is in any given moment. The fifth principle is fostering independence. And so this is a special thing because it's an art. And a lot of people, initially when they come to me as couples, like they struggle with this aspect because they think like, us being alone won't be good for our relationship, and it kind of goes off into something else. But the truth is, the more that we can allow each other to be as we are and be able to thrive individually and focus on that and support each other through those scenarios, man, the intimacy deepens, because we start having the energy that's needed to be closer together. Like a better me, a more independent me, gives me the confidence and the courage to be closer to somebody, right? So if we're willing to, in our relationship and as individuals, foster the independence of each other, we start actually moving closer because we're stronger on our own, right? So it doesn't become a needy scenario. Instead, it becomes a wanting scenario. And when you start wanting your partner, that's magical, right? Us needing our partner, like, that can sometimes not be good. But when I want my partner and I'm doing everything because I want my partner, everything changes. It's a game changer. Okay. So fostering independence is the fifth principle.